Most people in Minneapolis agree on one thing. You never really know how strong you are until winter decides to test you. And that year, the winter of 2023, hit harder than anyone expected. The kind of winter that made the news for breaking records, shutting down highways, freezing car doors, and pushing even lifelong Minnesotans to the edge. And in the middle of that brutal season, on a quiet street near Lake Nokomis, a woman named Lisa Harding was just trying to make it through each day without falling apart. It started on a Thursday morning in early December, right around 6:30, when the temperature had dropped to -17 degrees Fahrenheit before the sun even rose. The sky was still dark, the kind of dark that felt heavy, with clouds stretching low over the city like a thick gray blanket. Lisa stood at her apartment window with a mug of coffee that had already gone lukewarm, watching snow swirl wildly across the streetlights. Everything outside looked like it was shaking. The wind howled as if the city itself were groaning. Lisa pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders. She had lived in Minneapolis for 8 years, long enough to understand how cold the winters could be, but this one felt different. Sharper. Heavier. More punishing. Maybe because she was facing it alone for the first time in years. Her boyfriend, Mark, had moved to Seattle in late summer. A new job. A fresh start. Promises to visit. Promises that faded with each passing week. And then the call in November. The one that ended everything gently, politely, quietly. Too quietly. She had told her friends she was fine. That she understood. That it was mutual. But winter has a way of stripping you down to the truth, and as she stood in that kitchen with the colorless morning seeping in, she realized she wasn't fine at all. She was trying to rebuild a life in one of the coldest cities in America just as the coldest season arrived. Around 7:15, her phone buzzed with a weather alert. Blizzard warning. Expected snowfall up to 18 inches by afternoon. Winds up to 50 miles per hour. Dangerous visibility. The kind of warning locals took seriously. The kind of day where schools closed, businesses shut down early, and the streets emptied. But Lisa didn't have the luxury of staying home. She worked at a small senior care center near Hennepin Avenue, and staff shortages meant she couldn't take a single day off. She had residents depending on her. People who needed help eating, dressing, taking medications. People who had no one else. She layered up slowly. Thermal leggings. Wool socks. Thick jeans. A long-sleeve shirt. A hoodie. A scarf. 2 pairs of gloves. And finally, her old navy blue parka that she bought 3 winters ago on sale at a Target in Bloomington. It had a rip near the left pocket, but it was the warmest thing she owned. Stepping outside felt like stepping into another world. The cold slapped her face instantly, taking her breath away for a moment. Ice crusted the edges of the sidewalk. Her boots crunched loudly each time she took a step. Snowflakes, sharp as tiny needles, stung her cheeks as the wind whipped past. The bus stop was only 2 blocks away, but it felt like a mile. By the time she reached it, her eyelashes were coated with frost. A man in a bright orange construction jacket stood hunched over, hands shoved deep inside his pockets, staring down the empty street as if begging the bus to appear. "Rough morning, huh?" he muttered, not looking up. Lisa nodded, breath forming a cloud. "Minneapolis winter," she said. "What else is new?" They both laughed, though a little weakly. In this city, small talk about weather was a kind of shared survival language. It took almost 20 minutes for the number 5 bus to arrive, its headlights glowing through the blowing snow like 2 floating moons. The doors hissed open, letting out a burst of warm air that felt heavenly for a moment. Lisa climbed in, tapped her card, and found a seat near the middle. Most of the windows were fogged, but she could still see outlines of snowdrifts piling along buildings and fences. As the bus crawled forward, the city blurred into a white haze. Familiar streets disappeared. Houses became faint shadows. Traffic lights glowed softly through the storm, blinking like lonely signals from another world. For some reason, it made her chest tighten. She wasn't sure if it was the cold, the storm, or the loneliness. Maybe all 3. They passed Lake Street, then Chicago Avenue, then the intersection near the old bakery where she used to buy pastries with Mark on Sundays. She looked away from the window quickly, swallowing a sudden ache rising in her throat. When the bus reached her stop, she stepped into snow that reached nearly to her knees. The wind pushed against her body so hard she had to lean forward to keep moving. Each breath felt sharp. Each step felt heavier than the last. But she kept walking. The senior care center was warm inside, filled with smells of oatmeal and cinnamon. Soft Christmas music played from a radio near the front desk. And despite the storm outside, the residents greeted her with smiles, as if the cold had no power within those walls. "Morning, Lisa," called Mr. Anderson, an 83-year-old retired teacher who loved telling stories about the 60s. "You made it through the blizzard, huh?" She smiled. "Had to," she said. "Somebody has to keep you guys out of trouble." The day passed slowly. She helped Mrs. Nguyen button her winter sweater before physical therapy. She read the morning newspaper to Mr. Pollard, who couldn't see well anymore. She held the hand of a woman named Irene when she got scared during a loud gust of wind. Lisa tried to keep her own sadness tucked away, hidden under her practiced warmth, but every now and then she felt it pushing to the surface. By late afternoon, the snow was still falling hard. The storm wasn't letting up. And Lisa wasn't sure how she would get home. Buses were running late. Roads were closing. Temperatures kept dropping. But somehow, even in the worst winter Minneapolis had seen in years, something small and unexpected would happen that night. Something that would change the way she saw her life, her city, and herself. Something that would mark the beginning of how Lisa survived her hardest winter. By the time Lisa finished her shift, the sky outside had darkened into a deep blue, the kind that almost looked black if not for the faint reflection of streetlights bouncing off the snow. It was only 5 in the afternoon, but winter evenings in Minneapolis always arrived early, slipping in quietly and fast. She stood near the front window of the center, watching snow whip across the parking lot in fast, chaotic swirls. The storm was getting worse. Patricia, the night supervisor, walked over with her scarf already wrapped twice around her neck. She was in her early 40s, always calm, always composed, and always ready to crack a joke just when things felt too heavy. "I can't believe you walked here this morning," she said, shaking her head. "You're braver than me. I nearly called in sick just driving here." Lisa gave a small laugh. "I didn't really have a choice." Patricia sighed. "Well, you're not walking home tonight. I'm giving you a ride." Lisa hesitated. Patricia lived in Edina, the opposite direction of her apartment. It would add at least 20 extra minutes to her commute in weather that was already dangerous. "Are you sure?" she asked. Patricia waved her hand. "You're not going to freeze to death on my watch. Grab your stuff." They stepped outside together, pushing through the wind. Snowflakes struck their faces like tiny pieces of ice. Lisa pulled her hood tight while Patricia struggled to unlock her car door, slamming her shoulder against it until the frozen seal finally cracked open. The engine groaned when she started it, like it resented being woken up in weather this cold. The drive was slow. Streetlights glowed through white curtains of blowing snow. The wipers squeaked across the windshield, barely keeping up. Cars crawled along at 10 miles per hour. A plow truck rumbled ahead of them, sending waves of snow flying to the side. Patricia kept one hand tight on the wheel. "Crazy night, huh?" she muttered, squinting. Lisa nodded. She tried to relax, but her shoulders were tense. The storm looked endless from inside the moving car. The city she knew felt unfamiliar. The familiar gas station signs, restaurants, and bus stops were hidden behind thick layers of white. As they approached her neighborhood, the roads grew narrower. Snow drifts rose nearly 3 feet high along the sidewalks. Some houses had their Christmas lights buried under fresh layers of snow, glowing faintly like lost ornaments. Patricia stopped in front of Lisa's apartment building. Her headlights illuminated the stairway, already half covered. "You sure you're okay?" Patricia asked. Lisa nodded. "Thank you. Really. Get inside quick before you turn into a popsicle," Patricia said with a smile. Lisa hurried up the stairs, boots sinking into soft snow. When she reached her door, she brushed ice from her coat, stamped her feet, and stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around her instantly. The heater hummed quietly from the corner. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the candle she'd forgotten to blow out that morning. It should have felt comforting. Safe. But the apartment felt too quiet. Too empty. As if the storm outside had swallowed all sound. She set her bag down, hung her parka, and turned on a small lamp near the couch. The soft yellow glow made the room feel a little less lonely. She heated a can of tomato soup, the simplest meal she could manage after such a long day, then sat on the couch with the bowl warming her hands. As the wind howled against the windows, she found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. Pictures from last year's winter. Pictures of her and Mark at Minnehaha Falls, smiling with the frozen waterfall behind them. Pictures of them drinking hot cocoa near the Christmas market. Pictures she hadn't been ready to delete yet. Her chest tightened. She locked her phone quickly and set it aside. Outside, the storm raged harder. The building creaked. Snow piled against the glass. The sound of the wind made her feel small, like the world outside was vast and unforgiving. But then, a sudden noise made her sit up straight. A faint knock. At first she thought she imagined it. Maybe it was the storm hitting the siding. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. But then it came again. A second knock. Louder this time. Lisa's heart thudded. No one visited her at night. Not during a blizzard. Not without warning. She stood slowly, the floor cold beneath her feet. Another knock echoed through the hallway. She walked to the door, listening carefully. Then a voice broke through the storm. "Lisa? It's me. Are you home?" The voice was familiar. Unexpected. A voice she hadn't heard in weeks. She froze. Breath caught in her throat. It was Mark. Standing at her door. In the middle of the worst winter storm Minneapolis had seen in years. For a moment, Lisa wondered if the cold outside had seeped into her imagination, making her hear things that weren't there. But then the voice came again, muffled through the thick wooden door. "Lisa, it's freezing out here. Can we talk?" Her pulse quickened. She stepped closer but didn't open the door right away. The memories of their last conversation flickered painfully in her mind. The quiet breakup. The polite reasoning. The way he paused between sentences, as if trying not to hurt her, but hurting her anyway. She had folded herself inward after that call, trying to convince herself she didn't need him. That she could handle the storm alone. And now he was here. She took a slow breath, unlocked the door, and pulled it open just a few inches. Mark stood in the hallway, covered in snow from head to toe. His brown hair was wet, sticking to his forehead. His coat was dusted white, and the scarf around his neck was stiff with frost. His face was flushed from the cold, but his eyes held something warmer. Something apologetic. Something unsettled. "Hey," he said, breathing hard. I know this is a terrible time, but I didn't know where else to go." Lisa blinked. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Seattle." He nodded once, almost ashamed. I came back. Can I come in before I turn into an ice sculpture?" Despite the storm inside her chest, she opened the door wider. Mark stepped in, stamping snow off his boots and brushing ice from his sleeves. The apartment swallowed him in warmth as he exhaled shakily, as if the heat itself was a relief he didn't deserve. Lisa closed the door slowly. "What happened? Why are you here?" Mark hesitated, taking off his gloves. His fingers were red and stiff. "I landed this afternoon. I tried calling, but the signal was bad. Flights were delayed. Roads were closing. And I needed to see you." Lisa crossed her arms, partly from cold, partly from confusion. "You needed to see me for what?" Mark ran a hand through his damp hair and let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for weeks. "Seattle wasn't what I thought it would be. The job wasn't what they promised. The city felt wrong. Everything felt wrong." He paused, searching for words that didn't feel heavy. "Or maybe everything felt wrong because I left the one person who actually made my life make sense." Lisa's stomach tightened. The room suddenly felt warmer than it should. She turned away, walking toward the small kitchen to give herself space to breathe. Mark followed slowly, watching her carefully. "You broke up with me, Mark," she said quietly. "You made a choice." "I know," he whispered. "And it was the biggest mistake I've made in years." Lisa swallowed. Her fingers trembled as she set her bowl aside. The storm outside hammered against the windows, filling the silence between them with a low, trembling growl. Mark stepped closer, but not too close. He gave her room. "I shouldn't have left when things got hard. I shouldn't have expected a new city to fix what I was afraid to face. I hurt you, and I know that. But I couldn't spend another winter pretending I'm okay somewhere else." Lisa felt her breath catch, but she refused to turn around. Not yet. She stared at the countertop, trying to steady herself. "Why now? Why show up like this?" "Because the storm made it clear," Mark said softly. "When you're standing alone in a whiteout, freezing, with everything around you disappearing into nothing, You realize who you wish you were standing next to. And for me, it was you. It's always been you. Lisa closed her eyes. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her wanted to scream. Part of her just wanted the honesty she'd been starved for. But then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. A heavy whoosh sound came from the hallway. Then everything went dark. Lisa gasped. The heater's hum died instantly. The lamp beside the couch flickered out. The refrigerator clicked off. A power outage. The whole building swallowed by silence. The storm outside roared louder now, no longer muted by electricity. Wind slapped the windows with sharp gusts. Somewhere upstairs, something banged loudly. Pipes groaned in the walls. Mark instinctively stepped closer. Lisa, stay near me. The temperature's gonna drop fast without heat. She opened her eyes in the dark, her breath visible in the cold air already thickening. Mark's voice softened. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere this time. Lisa's chest rose and fell slowly as she stood in the dim shape of her kitchen, the storm pressing in from all sides. Outside, Minneapolis was frozen in chaos. Inside, Lisa's past and future stood together in the dark. And none of them knew what the night was about to bring. The wind that swept through Minneapolis that January evening was unlike anything Lisa had felt before. It didn't just cut through her coat. It pressed against her ribs, slipped between her fingers, and made every step feel like she was walking through a world carved from frozen glass. The city was quiet, as if every sound had frozen midair and fallen to the ground like shards of ice. Snow drifted down slowly, illuminated by the yellow glow of the street lamps along Hennepin Avenue, turning the sidewalks into pale rivers of powder. Lisa tightened the scarf around her neck as she walked out of her apartment complex on Lyndale Avenue. It was late, far later than she usually went out. The clock on her phone showed 6:59 in the evening, but the darkness looked more like midnight. Her breath curled into the air in heavy white clouds as she made her way across the street, careful not to slip on the thin layer of ice that had formed over the past 2 days. Inside her building, the power outage was entering its third hour. The heating system had failed again, and the temperature inside the stairwell felt like the inside of a freezer. She had layered 2 sweaters beneath her coat, but still, the cold managed to seep in. It was the kind of cold that made people start questioning choices they had made years before. Why Minneapolis? Why winter? Why this life? She reached the corner store near 26th Street, hoping that maybe, by some miracle, they still had a portable heater or at least more candles. But when she pushed open the glass door, the bell above it jingled, revealing only darkness and an employee sitting behind a counter lit by a small emergency lantern. Power's out here too? Lisa asked, rubbing her hands together. Citywide in this area, the young man replied with a sigh. They're saying maybe 9 or 10 tonight. Maybe. In Minneapolis winter, maybe could stretch into hours that felt like days. Lisa nodded, bought what little she could find, a pack of matches, 2 small candles, and a bottle of water, then stepped back into the freezing air. Her eyelashes had already begun catching snowflakes like tiny crystals. She brushed them away, blinking. As she walked home, she kept replaying the voicemail she had listened to earlier. Her sister, Clara, from Arizona. Warm, sunny Arizona. The kind of place that didn't try to break a person every January. Lise, are you okay? Call me back when you can. You sound exhausted lately. Lisa sighed, her breath turning into mist. Exhausted didn't even begin to describe it. Between her 2 part-time jobs, the rising rent, the car repair she still hadn't paid off, and now this brutal winter storm that kept rolling in waves over the city, she felt stretched thin. As if one more unexpected problem would finally tip her over the edge. When she reached her building, she pushed open the heavy door and was met with near silence. Only the faint creaking of pipes expanding in the cold broke the stillness. The hallway lights were off, and the air inside felt even colder than outside. She climbed the stairs quickly, each step echoing through the empty building. Inside her apartment, she placed the candles on her coffee table and lit them. The faint orange glow bounced off the walls, giving the room a strange, nostalgic feeling. It reminded her of childhood power outages back in Duluth, when her father would set up blankets and tell stories until the electricity returned. Those nights had felt magical then. But now, as an adult facing the cold alone, the magic felt replaced by survival. She wrapped herself in a thick blanket and moved closer to the candles. Her phone buzzed twice, low battery warning. She plugged it into her portable charger, hoping it would last through the night. Outside, the wind howled, pushing against the windows. The sound felt almost alive, like an angry whisper circling her building, searching for cracks to slip through. Snow piled against the ledges, dulling the noise of the city until everything felt remote and far away. Then came a sudden thud from upstairs. Lisa froze, listening. Another thud. Not heavy, but sharp. Like someone dropping something on the floor. She waited, but the building remained quiet after that. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe the pipes. Old buildings made strange noises in winter. She tried to focus on warming her hands, holding them in front of the candle flame. But something about the sound stayed with her. A nagging curiosity mixed with unease. Minutes passed. The candles flickered. Her phone glowed faintly on the table. Then another sound came, this time from the hallway outside. A soft shuffle. Slow. Almost hesitant. Not quite footsteps, but something close enough that it made her sit up straight. She listened carefully, heart beginning to race. The hallway was supposed to be empty. Her neighbors, a middle-aged couple who worked nights, wouldn't be home until early morning. The elderly man who lived across from her rarely left his apartment. And the young student next door was visiting family in Wisconsin. So who was in the hallway? Lisa stood slowly, tightening the blanket around herself. The candlelight shook gently as she moved, casting long shadows across the room. She approached the door and pressed her ear against it. Silence. Then, almost too faint to catch, a soft sound. Not a shuffle this time. More like a whisper. A voice. A name. Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat. Because it sounded like someone was whispering her name. She pulled back from the door, pulse pounding. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it was the wind again, sneaking through the cracks. But the hallway had been completely silent just seconds before. Get it together, she murmured, rubbing her arms. It's just the storm. She turned away from the door and moved toward the window. Snow continued to drift downward, light and soft now, as if the storm had paused to catch its breath. The city lights in the distance shimmered through the frosty air, blurred by ice forming on the glass. Just as she exhaled, trying to calm herself, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a low battery warning. It was a message. From an unknown number. She hesitated before unlocking her phone. The message preview showed only 3 words. Are you alone? Lisa stared at the screen, her heartbeat suddenly loud in her ears. The room felt colder, even with the candles burning. The storm outside, the noise upstairs, the whisper in the hallway, it all seemed to collapse around her in that single moment. She opened the message. There was nothing else. No explanation. No name. And before she could even think of what to do next, another noise echoed through the hallway outside her door. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a knock. A slow, deliberate knock. Lisa returned home that evening with a heaviness she could not shake. The wind outside had grown sharper, brushing against the windows in long cold strokes that sounded almost like warnings. She turned on the small lamp beside the couch, letting its warm yellow glow soften the loneliness of the living room. The clock on the wall showed 8:42, though the sky looked like it had been midnight for hours. That was how Minneapolis winters always felt. Time folded strangely. Days blurred. Nights stretched. She made herself a cup of hot cocoa, the same brand she used to drink with her mother on cold evenings back in Wisconsin when she was little. The steam rose and warmed her face, bringing a quiet comfort she desperately needed. She sat by the window and watched as the snow continued to fall. Thick. Heavy. Relentless. Each flake drifted downward like a tiny reminder that the world was still moving, even when she felt stuck. Around 9:15 her phone buzzed. It was Hannah again, asking if she had made it home safely. Lisa replied quickly, promising she was fine, though she could feel the tremble in her fingers. After sending the message she turned her phone face down on the table. She didn't want to talk anymore. She didn't want to explain the strange emptiness that had been growing inside her. What could she even say? That a season could feel like an enemy? That she was scared of her own silence? That she felt the weight of December pressing on her chest like a cold hand? By 10:30 the wind had grown ferocious. The walls groaned faintly. The old radiator clicked and rattled as it struggled to keep the small apartment warm. Lisa wrapped herself in 2 blankets and tried to read, but the words on the page refused to stay still. Every paragraph dissolved the moment she reached the end. Eventually she put the book down and rested her head on the arm of the couch, letting her thoughts spill in slow waves. She thought about her father, who had taught her how to drive on frozen country roads. She remembered how he used to laugh, saying winter wasn't something you defeated, it was something you learned to dance with. Back then his words had made her feel brave. Now they felt like fragments of another lifetime. A life she could no longer touch. Close to midnight the lights flickered. Just once at first. Then again, longer. The apartment dimmed into a deep orange, as if the world was holding its breath. Lisa sat up quickly. She hated power outages. Last winter she spent nearly 6 hours in the dark with nothing but a flashlight and a dying phone. Tonight she wasn't sure she had the strength for that again. The lights flickered a 3rd time and then steadied. She exhaled slowly, pulling the blankets tighter. The snowstorm outside roared, pushing against the building, reminding her how small she was in the face of nature. She stood and walked to the kitchen, checking the emergency drawer where she kept candles and batteries. Everything was still there, untouched. Somehow that small detail made her feel a bit steadier. At 12:20 she crawled into bed, though sleep did not come easily. The storm hammered against the roof. The window panes rattled. She stared at the ceiling, watching the faint shadows ripple whenever headlights from a passing snowplow swept across the room. Her mind replayed the day over and over. The broken car. The accident she nearly witnessed. The stranger who helped her. The cold that cut through her jacket like a blade. She wondered how many other people in Minneapolis were fighting the same invisible battles. How many were lying awake right now, trying to convince themselves that tomorrow would feel lighter. The thought comforted her in a quiet way, reminding her that even isolation could have company. Around 1:30 she finally drifted into a shallow sleep, though it felt more like slipping into a dim tunnel than resting. When she woke again the room was still dark, but the wind had settled. She checked her phone. It was 3:08 in the morning. Her throat was dry. Her back ached. And yet, for the first time in days, she felt something different. Not hope exactly. But a softness. As if the night was offering her a brief moment of calm. She got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The floor was cold against her feet. She poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, listening to the quiet. The storm had finally loosened its grip. The silence felt wide and gentle, like a fresh page waiting for words. Lisa walked back to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The neighborhood outside was completely transformed. Cars were buried in smooth mounds of snow. Trees stood still and heavy. Streetlights cast soft halos across the untouched white surface. It looked peaceful. Almost sacred. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a flicker of gratitude. For the storm passing. For the warmth inside her home. For the chance to keep going. Even if winter had taken so much from her, it had also forced her to slow down and listen to the things she usually ignored. At 3:22 she whispered to herself, barely audible in the quiet room, "I can get through this." The words didn't erase the weight she carried. They didn't bring back what she had lost. But they felt real. Solid. Like a tiny spark in a long dark season. And sometimes, in Minneapolis, in the middle of the coldest winter, a spark was enough. By the time the sun finally rose later that morning, casting a pale golden light across the frozen neighborhood, Lisa felt something she had not felt in a long while. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. But it was a quiet steadiness, the kind that grows only after long nights of fighting yourself and still choosing to rise. She stepped outside around 7:50, bundled tightly in her coat. The air was sharp, crisp, untouched by the noise of the day. Her boots sank into the fresh snow with a soft crunch that echoed down the empty street. For the first time in weeks she allowed herself to pause and breathe deeply, letting the cold air fill her lungs and remind her she was still here, still standing, still moving forward. Minneapolis mornings always had a way of humbling people, but today it felt different. The city looked softer, calmer. The storm had cleansed everything, leaving only silence and possibility. Lisa watched the pale sun inch higher above the rooftops, and in that moment she realized that surviving winter was not about being fearless. It was about learning how to keep going even when the world grew quiet and heavy. As she walked toward her car, she thought about the long nights she had endured, the small kindnesses that had carried her, and the strength she found in the stillness of the early morning. She knew more storms would come. More cold nights. More moments that pushed her to the edge of herself. But she also knew now that she was capable of withstanding them. When she finally reached the sidewalk, she stopped and turned back toward her apartment. The windows glowed softly behind frosted glass. That place, as small and imperfect as it was, had sheltered her through her hardest season. And now, as she stood beneath the quiet winter sky, she felt grateful in a way she couldn't quite explain. Lisa whispered to herself one last time, not out of fear this time but with gentle certainty, "I made it through." And as the new day unfolded over Minneapolis, she stepped forward into the snow, carrying with her the quiet courage that only the hardest winters could teach.